Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's symposium conversation. I'm so excited to speak with all of you and talk a little bit about your collaboration inspired by Simon Dinnerstein's work Solaris. Um, so I'm excited to bring Celia on as an interviewer today. She's prepared some questions. So without further ado, Celia, do you want to ask your first question?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm very excited to get to know Solaris a little bit better in your creative process. So the first question I had, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, yes, I can.
Okay. The first question I had was along the concept. So I was wondering if what was your collective concept established beforehand, or did it evolve more organically and kind of naturally along the making of your two pieces? And is that different from your typical way of working?
I'm not sure, are you addressing your question to me or to Alistair and myself?
I am Alistair and you, both of you guys.
I think the best way I could answer this is that I submitted some images to Audrey, to mosaics, and to my surprise and happiness, I heard that Alistair had selected a very unusual painting of mine, Solaris.
So adding to that, I was wondering if you have collaborated with artists before, artists of different disciplines, that is, and how your artistic process differs when having to actively respond to someone else's creations.
This is for Alistair, then.
Yeah, I think I can take this one. Yeah, so in terms of the process of, I think, reacting to another art form or another piece of art from another discipline, I think this was kind of the first time that I was able to actually have a conversation with the artist. I've created works that were inspired by something that was painted maybe 100 years ago or more, but this is really my first opportunity to actually have conversations with a living visual artist, and I think, quite frankly, like the conversations that Simon and I had were like even more I think like the art, the piece of art itself, the Solaris, was just struck me immediately. But then having these conversations to kind of dig deep into Simon's process and the kind of genesis of that work in particular really kind of, it just had everything for me in terms of what I needed to create kind of a musical reflection on it. So I'm super grateful to Simon for spending, like, I don't know how many hours we talked for, Simon, but it was like some of the most really enriching, kind of conversation, among the most enriching conversations I've had with an artist from a different discipline.
So if I could add something here, the sequencing was, I did the painting a while ago. It wasn't done with any music in mind. It was an unusual painting for me to do. It had an unusual origin, and the painting has been exhibited a few times, and it's a very energized painting, and it's quite small. And what you don't see in person is that what you don't see unless you hear in person is that the painting has a lot of depth. Um, it's it the depth is about 3 inches. So I think that the dimensions are 20 by 18 by 3 inches. So the buildup of paint is about 3 inches, and this is because the paint comes originally from a palette of mine. And in the palette, the paint that I use the most is white. And so the white paint is like 100 times greater than anything else. And it literally is 3 inches off the flat surface.
And do you play with texture like that in most of your work? And does that only oil paint that builds up?
It's all of it is oil paint. My paintings generally have a lot of texture, but this painting is literally a palette. So the palette is, in terms of the way I use a palette, I put the colors down the same way each time. White at the top, black at the bottom, warm colors on the left, and cool colors on the right. And then instead of cleaning the palette every day, I just keep adding white to white, ochre to ochre, sienna to sienna, blue to blue, green to green. And the paint keeps piling up and going higher and higher. And I mix the paint in the middle. And when the middle surface becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, I discard the palette and work on another one. But basically what I did was I didn't throw the palette away. I just kept it. And I liked the way it looked, even though I wasn't using it. I just liked the way it looked. One day when I was looking at this palette, staring at it and staring at it and staring at it, I thought it would be interesting to see in the middle a self-portrait and maybe some botanical forms growing out of the paint. So the palette is really like a found object and has abstract expressionist qualities. Then into that, I painted quite realistically a self-portrait and some botanical form. And so the sum total of it is both non-objective and figurative, which is very hard to combine in one painting.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was the most abstract piece of your body of work, at least of what I've seen. And I was assuming that you guys were working in the same timeline, but Alistair, you picked his painting first and then established your own piece. Is that right?
Yeah, it's I think Audrey sent me like, I don't know, like 10 different pieces to choose from, and it was pretty immediate. I didn't need to take long to figure out that was the piece I wanted to do. And also just reading, Simon's description on this website about the work, and again, how this kind of idea of a found object, which is really, really cool to me, because in a way, this piece in particular, working with Emma, who is here with us, she's an amazing, just unbelievable violinist, was also kind of like, we were working together. We were assigned to work together at school, and I just thought that this would be like the perfect, like, kind of bringing together all these different things to create something that really, Emma and I spent hours just on Zoom playing around with different techniques that she could do, different sounds that she could create. Like I would describe something and then she would just try to interpret it in a way. And that in itself is kind of like a found thing. It's like this collaboration is something that was found. And all these different sounds were kind of just, I didn't really like intend for some of them, but I was like, Emma, that's really cool. How do we write this down? And so that was really, really, again, like thinking about the process of Simon creating Solaris, it's somewhat, I found like these parallels in actually our conversation, Simon, of these parallels between the process of creating that work and creating this musical reflection. But I mean, Emma, we were on Zoom for a lot of time testing stuff out. I mean, you saw the work, right? In terms of I showed it to you, and did you feel like it was more intense of like a collaboration between you and me in terms of the sounds that you were creating, or was it something that was you just were like, okay, I'm just gonna play this?
Well, from hearing what Simon's process was like in creating his work of art, I see a lot of parallels in the way that we actually put together. I say we, you're the composer, I played it, but it was a collaboration of putting together this piece. And I can see the parallels in terms of, we started out with individual motifs and colors. They were layered on top of each other, they were altered, they were mixed. And it was really an interesting sort of collaboration. I've never worked this closely before with a composer. Most of the time I am given a piece of music to interpret, or it's something that's very old and has been played many times before, or if it hadn't been played before, I didn't get an opportunity to speak with the composer, let alone have an impact on how it was composed. And I've had a few opportunities to work with composers, but not to this extent. And it was kind of cool to see it all come together and actually see a sort of see my own voice being heard in the music. And it made it a lot more special for me to play. Yeah, it was really interesting to work in this way, especially since Alistair and I have actually never met before. We go to the same school, but we during this year it was never a possibility for us to meet. So I feel like I know him extremely well through this process, but.
But again, I don't think I would have approached Emma in this way in terms of like, usually I just write the piece and I'll consult the player about, maybe a few questions. But like Emma, you and I started meeting before the piece was even like, I even started. Like we just were talking and just getting to know each other and trying out some stuff. And I don't think I would have approached it that way if I wasn't kind of in that space that I think Simon and I kind of put ourselves in terms of approaching this kind of piece. So
Yeah,
I wondered
sorry.
if I could, please, I come back to you. I just wanted to add one thing that seemed significant to me is that one of the things that I spoke to Alistair about was the name of the painting. And Alistair really ran with this idea. So I think I should say something because we haven't spoken about this. I never thought of the name of the painting while I did it at all. I just worked on the painting, got it to be finished, and really enjoyed the process of doing it. I had to think of a name, and I kept on not deciding on one, but then all of a sudden it came to me what this painting reminded me of. And I remembered a film that I had seen called Solaris by a great Russian director whose name is Andrei Tarkovsky. And I highly recommend this film. So in the film, a man is is sent into space, outer space. It's based on a book by a Polish writer named Lem. So this man is sent into this spaceship to find a space station that has been looking at a planet. And everyone on this space station has something wrong with them. They're suffering in some way. And the people who are doing this can't figure out what is going on. And so they send this man there. And he goes up and he finds himself in this new area, and everything is in disarray. And then you could see that they're looking down at this planet. And in this planet, you see oceans and almost like oceans vibrating and moving around. And they keep looking at the planet and the oceans. And the planet and oceans has a weird ability. And that ability is it sends a memory to the people who look at this long enough. And the memory is not always good. The memory is kind of melancholy. And so the man who comes to view this almost feels a little depressed or sad by the whole thing. And it tells him something about his life. So in a sense, he has to find his own journey, but he has to go all the way to outer space to find it. He can't look in a mirror. He can't look down. He can't look at his own stomach. He can't look at his own head. He has to go all the way to outer space to find who he is. And something about that struck me as an analogy to the image that I had done. So I decided to call it Solaris. And what Alistair did was he saw the movie, he thought about the movie, he called me back about it, we talked about it, he talked about other movies of Tarkovsky, and he really ran with it. So I want to thank you for doing that, Alistair, because that was well beyond the call of duty.
No, I mean, I think it was, I mean, again, just having this, it's real privilege to be able to again, have those conversations because, you know, I talk to Emma about this all the time, is that composing is such a solitary sport. I mean, a lot of, you know, professions are, especially in the arts, but this kind of opportunity to be able to talk with you and to be able to look at, you know, these things that have inspired you and see what touches me as well, or what reaches me, and then being able to bring Emma into the picture, and then, you know, having her and I, you know, be able to talk through things. It's, again, I don't feel like it's my piece in a way. Like, I feel it's just kind of like this, you know, community effort, you know, in terms of making it happen. And so, yeah, it was again, much more exciting and you know, just enriching than just being asked to write, you know, another solo violin piece or something like that. Not that writing for solo violin in itself, Emma, is a chore, but yeah, no, again, one of, especially after a year where, you know, at school we had to write like 4 or 5 solo pieces this year, and so it's just a lot of, you know, just a lot of quantity of those types of pieces. So this was, you know, again, kind of added to that mix, and to be able to have all of these different energies kind of, you know, supporting the piece along its way is just so much more exciting than sitting down and writing a piece of it, you know, just something I would want to write anyway. So that's why, again, so grateful to Simon and Emma for just spending an inordinate amount of hours with me on Zoom. You're probably sick of me by now, but
Well, it's actually a shame that Tarkovsky is not alive, because if he heard this piece, he would hire you for his next film. He did very few films, actually, and he was kind of a cult figure in Russia, a renegade. Ended up doing his last two films in Italy and Sweden, but he had trouble financing his films. But I'm sure if he heard this conversation and heard your piece of music, he would say, "Next one, you got it."
Well, I just wanted to speak up and say that when I saw Simon's piece of art for the first time, I was very drawn to it. I mean, there's a lot about it that is very beautiful and very unique, and textures and colors and everything. But also the idea of being completely alone, surrounded by all of these colors and ideas, and it really had like a sort of reflection on how I felt about, well, I guess about the past year and having to be a creative person in an isolated space, which has been very tough for all of us, I'm sure. And after going through an entire journey of naming your piece of art, Alistair sort of went through a journey of naming his piece of music, and throughout the entire process, it was called Solaris, and I think that was basically all it was called. And then at the very last minute, he changed the name to Simon and Solaris, and I thought that was cute. I thought that was it. It made it more about the collaboration between all the artists rather than just about the piece of art itself. And I think it speaks a little more closely to how this process went.
I really should have called it of Emma and Simon and Solaris, but that probably wouldn't have been too.
Don't get too wordy.
Yeah, exactly. Don't want to get too wordy. But it's true. Like, and Simon and I talked about this in terms of, and Emma, you and I have thought about this when we're thinking about the form of the piece. It's very much kind of this. It's a very cyclical piece, just very similarly to how Solaris kind of looks. It's the impression that it gives is very cyclical. And what I wanted to do is just to kind of almost imagine that the piece starts, if you're looking super myopically at just the very kind of melancholic self-portrait in the middle. And then the piece starts there, and it's very like it's very icy. It's very these disparate ideas trying to come together. And then it's almost like it pans out or zooms out from that self-portrait, and you start seeing all of these textures and energies and colors and all these different things starting to kind of overwhelm the piece like it does on the canvas. And then you reach this big point where you see the whole work in full, or maybe the whole musical idea in full. It's very virtuosic, and Emma is just, every single person I played this recording to, they're like, how did she do that? Like, it's insane. But it's just exploring the real kind of virtuosic limits of the violin. And then the piece starts to zoom back in onto the self-portrait. So it's I would say maybe slightly programmatic of a piece, but really trying to capture this kind of melancholic self-portrait, contrasted to these just explosive colors and imagery around it. So that's just something we came to in the end, is just trying to figure out the form in its relation to the structure of the painting.
Yeah, from the very beginning, he had these ideas about circles and about the painting being circular on a circular canvas. And during our very first meeting, I think Alistair asked me if I could play in a circle on the violin. And this is before any music was written. So, trying to play in a circle rather than up and down. Fortunately, that doesn't really make a great sound. So we had to go from there and try to figure out ways of portraying circles in ways that were more conceptual and more musical and I suppose a little less literal, more artistic. And I think from there we came up with, or Alistair came up and I informed the ideas of Alistair about various ways in which circles can be portrayed in music, both in the, starting at one point and growing and then coming back to that point, that's a circle, or, certain musical gestures that have a circular quality to them, or, just like little flutterings of sound that come and go and, have a wave quality to them. So we had to really think about how to translate this piece of art into something that has virtually no visuals to it, or not to rely on the visuals to make the piece speak.
Yeah, and really trying to manage these kind of smaller little, you guess you could call it circular motives or ideas or techniques or something, and then trying to build like a larger, kind of going from the micro to the macro in terms of how these things can be represented. And of course, there's so many different ways of reacting to a painting or another art form, or another discipline. You can just focus on one specific thing. Or you could, focus on just a facial expression or just one movement if you're thinking about, dance or whatever. I mean, but in terms of this piece, because of its just the even though it's a very small painting, it just has this very kind of encapsulating, kind of hypnotic effect. I felt like a musical reflection needed to capture like the whole world of it, the whole story, the genesis, and all these different things. And of course, I probably didn't accomplish that. There's so many different ways of looking at something. But this is just maybe one interpretation or just my own personal reaction to Simon's work. It would be super cool if 10 composers just all were thrown this, piece, and then just see what would happen, with all of these different perspectives and reactions. That would be really, really cool to see how somebody else would react to it. It probably would sound like a very different piece.
In listening to your conversation, Alistair and Emma, well, first thing when I first heard the piece performed, your performance is like a bravura response. I mean, absolutely ravishing bravura. But one thing that comes through in this conversation, I think this is an analogy, or in the world of fine arts, it's very hard to combine abstract expressionism and figurative art together. And I think that in what Alistair did in the composition and what Emma did in playing is to combine a sense of dissonance and melody. I don't know if those are the right words, but I think you understand what I mean, together. And I think that's very hard. I like that very much. I like that multiple families enjoying something together, even though they may hate each other.
But that's the other thing about the painting itself. Sorry to interrupt you, Audrey. I know you take
Oh no,
yourself.
go ahead.
Yeah, but that's the really cool thing about the painting is that you just have this like stark contrast between this self-portrait and its surroundings. And I get that is maybe something implicitly I was thinking about in terms of combining, these very either dissonant or otherworldly effects for the violin, and combining that with maybe these kind of haunting or opaque kind of melodies that are trying to break through. And it does actually, I think in the end, a little bit. Emma, correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of, there's only one real moment in the piece where Emma is actually allowed to play with the full kind of voice of the violin. And it really only happens for like 10 or 20 seconds. But I mean, and just going back to Emma's kind of virtuosity, like I've had many people look at it and my teachers looking at it and things like that. And they were just like, you're never going to get a better performance of this piece. Like this is like, you've hit the jackpot. And this is like, but that's the thing is like the piece itself, a lot of it is just the expression and the interpretation. And Emma just really just takes it to a whole other level than just what's on the page. So anyway, just wanted to highlight that for Emma, because she's just so brilliant.
Well, I did want when we started to work together, I did want to kind of give you the feeling that there were no limitations, because when we're talking about writing for different instruments, I think some of the conversations that revolve around that is about an instrument's limitations, what it's talking about, what an instrument can't do. So like a violin can't play these two notes together, or a trombone can't hit this kind of tone quality. But I kind of started the conversation at a point where the violin can do anything, and then work down from there instead of trying, to always fit the instrument. Because when given a sort of challenge, a technical challenge or a musical challenge that hasn't been presented to me before, oftentimes one can figure out a way to make it work, or can figure out a way to get around the instrument and get those notes to happen. And I can kind of tell that Alistair felt that comfort, that what he wrote, I will give it my best shot, and that I think it makes it a little more exciting to work together in that, from that perspective, rather than the perspective of the violin can't play all these notes, so we shouldn't even write them in the first place.
You'd never tell a composer, oh yeah, we can do anything here. This is all. That's usually a bad road to take. But with Emma too, it's like there's just so much trust there, and that's the amazing thing is that, I feel like I've known Emma for years, and we've never met in person. And the same thing with Simon. I haven't met Simon in person, and so like it's just so cool that in spite of all of this, there is something, that can be brought out of it. And a lot of, again, like looking at all of the amazing things that, Musex has done with all of these different world premieres and the collaborations and partnerships that the organization has, forged together is just incredible, just to be able to see all of that. So we're just like one example of all of these amazing and different, partnerships and collaborations that have been created out of this, in spite of, again, this little screen that we're on.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing all of these perspectives. I really, really appreciate your participation. And Celia, I really appreciate you preparing these questions. I feel like a lot of your questions were answered organically through the course of the conversation, which is usually what happens. And I really have to say that I've seen these collaborations happen on a weekly basis, as Alistair has just mentioned. And this is one of those special circumstances where the three collaborators happen to be in completely different spaces, but internally there's such a sense of togetherness and closeness. And I haven't met any of you in person either. So we're on the same page, and I'm just so honored and thrilled that you were able to give your full hearts and your attention to this process. And I can't wait to share it with our audience. So I know this conversation could go on for hours, but I feel like just in the interest of time, well, we should maybe wind down. And I'm, again, thrilled to have you all as part of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Audrey.